Mercury retrograde has arrived to help you change your life. You don't need me to tell you that we have been living through a period of incredible, extraordinary uncertainty and rapid moving changes in the world, which has felt like, and in fact has involved, great collapses of old structures, dismantling and dissolutions of old systems. And with that collapse, with that dissolution, with that dismantling, people's consciousness, people's perceptions has also been in a period of liminality and transition. We are on this threshold of incredible change in this period of liminality in which we move from one state to another. These are all things that are always involved in Mercury retrograde periods. And I know there are many astrologers out there that are always hyping up each transit as the one that will change your life or possibly bring about some incredible transformation. But this Mercury retrograde period that goes from November 9th until November 29th of 2025 is in fact one that can bring about transformation. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And in fact, this is a Mercury retrograde that absolutely necessitates bravery, courage, resilience, perseverance, not just courage in acting in the world, courage in looking within, looking deep within, becoming aware of what we need to change about ourselves and our presence in the world, where we need to take greater leadership in the world with our external actions. But before we can even get there and really step into that new creative direction, that path of greater joy and meaning that comes through our work, we have to look within. We have to go through a period of internal change and transformation. And that is exactly what this Mercury retrograde period will offer. Now, you may have heard many astrologers talk about don't do anything during a Mercury retrograde period, don't sign a contract. This is a time where you have to go really within, not really act in the world. Things are going to be delayed. Anything you start is just going to get delayed, and there'll be great obstacles, and nothing's going to work out. If you've been experiencing and following astrology for many years and even decades, like myself, you actually know that this isn't true. If you're like myself, you've likely gone on incredible journeys and traveling even overseas to foreign countries that involves greater complexity during Mercury retrograde periods with no delays happening and nothing really going on. And you've likely had major breakthroughs and progress in your work during previous Mercury retrograde periods. Now, does communication breakdowns happen during Mercury retrograde? Are there, in fact, delays? Are there, in fact, storylines that we do have to loop around and come back to that occur during Mercury retrograde periods? Absolutely. And I would say, in terms of facing some breakdowns, this is a Mercury retrograde period for some reasons I'm going to talk about here, where this is more likely to occur. But these breakdowns and delays that Mercury brings about during the retrograde period, especially during the opening period, is really part of an alchemical process in which things do need to break down and dissolve. Things need to be purged. And this brings about a purification. This brings about a deepening of awareness. This brings about a reseeding and reanimating of ideas. And on the other side, this brings about a reconstitution of bringing the different parts back together that have broken down. This brings about a recohering, a regenerating, and a remembering of who we are on this deeper level. We're able to shed outworn patterns, change habitual patterns that have not been working for the best for us. We're able to look at things differently, and that different perspective that Mercury brings, even though it can be disruptive. And sometimes the accidents and delays and breakdowns that Mercury brings about is just part of what needs to happen to get us out of these stuck, stagnant places. The world is going to continue to be going through a period of incredible uncertainty. We know this for a fact, in part because of the Saturn and Neptune cycle that is coming to an end right now, with them both in Pisces. But this Mercury retrograde period is going to end up connecting with the Saturn Neptune cycle in very significant ways that I'm going to talk about, which is going to open up a key, unlocking that door to inner understanding of how to shift and be more fluid in moving with the changes and stepping more into that internal meaning and purpose of why we are actually here. One of the things about Mercury retrograde periods that can make it challenging is that Hermes, Mercury, is incredibly intensified. This is because Mercury is not, of course, the planet actually moving backwards. Mercury is orbiting in between our planet Earth and the sun, and Mercury retrograde periods are the point in which Mercury gets closest to us and moves within our orbit into an alignment with our planet and the sun. So Mercury is as close to us as Mercury ever gets. And we have this intensified, really, in many ways, incredibly powerful and potent presence of Mercury. But from our perspective that we use with astrology, it appears that Mercury is moving backwards through the zodiac slowly. It also means Mercury, who normally is moving fast, is stationing and staying still in a certain sector of the zodiac, bringing increased mercurial gravity and pressure to this place in your chart. And so, this is why when we enter the beginning of a Mercury retrograde period, like we are right now, we need to pay attention. We need to listen to our dreams. We need to be on the lookout for signs and omens and synchronicities that can help give us guidance to what is changing, what is starting to break down, what are we going to need to purge and purify in our life. And then as Mercury gets closer and closer to us in orbit and lines up in between us and the sun, we have this opportunity for incredible purification, release, reseeding, as well as reanimation. So this graphic is showing how, if we see the Earth down here at the bottom and the sun in the middle of this graphic, this circle is symbolizing the orbit of Mercury coming in between us on planet Earth with the sun during the Mercury retrograde period, and how on November 9th, when Mercury is stationing retrograde, Mercury is also approaching this point of moving from being visible as an evening star into being invisible. Mercury reaches its greatest height of max elongation, starts slowing down, and each night gets lower and lower into the sky. And Mercury then, around the time of stationing, so this week of November 9th, Mercury will be shifting from being visible to being invisible. And this symbolism of Mercury moving from being visible after sunset to being invisible is like Hermes descending into the underworld. Hermes is, of course, a god who unifies polarities. The planet Mercury can be considered masculine or feminine, day or night. The deity Hermes can also move between polarities and can move from the upper world to the underworld. And it is during these Mercury retrograde periods, when Mercury shifts into this phase of invisibility, that Hermes takes on this role of psychopomp. And this is why it can be so powerful for this internal journey to occur. Of course, Hermes as a god also marks divisions, boundaries, demarcates entrances into new states, thresholds. Mercury is a threshold guardian. And so Mercury does also mark a powerful threshold into a powerful liminal process when Mercury stations retrograde. Who we are when entering a Mercury retrograde can be dramatically different from who we are when we leave a Mercury retrograde period. That doesn't mean your inherent character changing. Really, the Mercury retrograde period can help with shedding and releasing what really isn't who you are and reconnecting and remembering who you truly are and getting more into that essential purpose and meaning on the other side. We can see here too that when Mercury is closest to us and lined up with us in between our planet and the sun, which will be on November 20th, which is when Mercury will form a conjunction with the sun. This is the great reanimation, regeneration, purification of Mercury. This year, this is going to line up almost exactly on the same day as the new moon in Scorpio. And so not only will Mercury be going through a death and a rebirth, so will the moon, and we'll have a new lunar cycle beginning at the same time a new Mercury cycle will be beginning, because Mercury here is shifting from being an evening star into being a morning star. Once Mercury stations direct and Mercury becomes visible again, which will happen at the end of November, Mercury will re-emerge into visibility as a morning star rising before the sun. This is the heliacal rise of Mercury, and this is the new cycle of Mercury that will emerge at the end of November that will be reseated on November 20th, the same time as this new moon in Scorpio. So one of the reasons this Mercury retrograde is going to be so powerful is because of that lineup of the Mercury cycle with the lunar cycle. It's also a period that involved a transition of signs. So in this period, Mercury will move from being in Sagittarius back to being in Scorpio. And so the degrees to really pay attention to in your natal chart is from 20 degrees and 42 minutes, 20 and a half degrees of Scorpio, up to 6 degrees and 51 minutes of Sagittarius. So essentially 20 degrees of Scorpio to 7 degrees of Sagittarius. Those are the degree range you really want to pay attention to. And this is that zone, people often call it the retrograde shadow zone, that Mercury is moving back and forth in between. Mercury first reached this degree on October 21st. That's when Mercury first got to the place where it will turn around. And Mercury will not get back to 6 degrees and 51 minutes of Sagittarius until December 16th. So, on one hand, we can think about there's something occurring between October 21st and December 16th, in which Mercury is moving back and forth between 20 and a half degrees of Scorpio to 7 degrees of Sagittarius. And so, those are some dates to think about. A tighter window, though, that's going to be especially important goes from October 29th until December 7th. On this graphic, you can see these are the maximum elongations when Mercury is maximum elongation as an evening star on October 29th, then goes through this underworld process. Mercury then becomes visible again, and it will be on December 7th that Mercury will reach max elongation as a morning star and will start speeding up again and moving forward faster than the sun again. And this will really initiate us into this next phase of the Mercury story, where we can really embody and integrate these deep internal changes we've gone through. The other thing about Mercury is that as a planet, it picks up the other influences of planets nearby, and it can take on its qualities. And so one of the things that's significant about this particular Mercury retrograde period is that it will begin with Mercury forming a conjunction with Mars, and it will end with Mercury stationing direct in a conjunction with Venus. Just that alone, we'll get a little bit more into the details of this transit in a moment here, but just knowing that this is a Mercury retrograde that begins with Mercury taking on a quality of Mars, which is going to go with strife and discord. In some ways, it's going to heighten the potential for some breakdowns and disruptions and things just kind of getting in the way. But we can think also about this quality of Mercury taking on the quality of Mars as necessitating courage. And necessity, too, in some cases, we are going to need to be taking action and responding to things. But the thing is, with Mercury and Mars coming together in the fiery sign of Sagittarius, Mars in a fire sign, especially in Sagittarius, a sign of Jupiter, is going to want to increase the speed of things and go after things. But with Mercury stationing, we're going to need to watch a tendency to maybe be a little too impulsive. We're going to need to be patient and take into account of what isn't going according to plan and honing in on a sharper analysis of our plans, as well as I'm talking about what's going on within us. How can Mars make some incisive analysis into our internal depths and show us in whatever ways things may not be going the way we would hope? What does this show about ourselves we need to bring more awareness to? And how can we start making some deep internal changes to get us more in alignment with where we do want our life to be headed? Because Mercury is combining with Mars at the beginning, we can expect the opening of this Mercury retrograde could be disruptive in that way. And just be patient with working through whatever might be coming up. Things, in fact, might look worse than they actually are going to end up being, because we're getting this big spark of Mars so strong at the beginning of this Mercury retrograde period. But because we know this will end up going back into the watery depths of Scorpio, and Mercury will eventually end the retrograde with Venus there, this is going to really enhance the ability for that watery internal journey within and reconstituting the parts, remembering the parts that have been dismembered, bringing things back together after they have been purified, and uniting our purpose with our inner character and getting in greater alignment with where we want things to go with our life. The other thing about this Mercury retrograde period is that it will begin at the same time that Jupiter is also stationing retrograde, and it will end at the same time that Saturn is stationing direct. And so we also have a contrast of Jupiter and Saturn. We have it beginning with Jupiter becoming very intensified in its presence in Cancer and stationing retrograde at the same time. So we are going to be not only getting very big Mercury messages, we're also going to be getting big messages from Jupiter. Whatever Jupiterian processes of growth and devotion we've been going through with the transit of Jupiter in Cancer is now sending us a message, and we're going to get a lot of information about what's working, what's not working. Because Mercury and Jupiter also rule opposite signs, Mercury rules Gemini, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, Mercury rules Virgo, Jupiter rules Pisces. In your natal chart, this means the opposite houses in your chart. So if you are Gemini rising ruled by Mercury, it means your seventh house of Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. So yourself and relationships have this Mercury Jupiter meaning. Likewise, if your first house is Pisces and you're ruled by Jupiter, and your seventh house is Virgo ruled by Mercury, you have the same thing. But in that case, you yourself is more connected to Jupiter. Relationships are connected to Mercury. You can also have this going on with the 10th house career, fourth house home and family. And in fact, all of the houses in your chart are going to have Mercury and Jupiter ruling opposite places. So there are all sorts of important life topics in your chart that are getting highly activated at the beginning of this Mercury retrograde period by both Mercury and Jupiter stationing simultaneously. This is something where if you want to get more information about, I'd recommend getting an astrology consultation. My books for November are open, so I will have a link below to my scheduler so you could book an astrological consultation so you can understand the complexity of what's going on with this Mercury retrograde and that. But just realize that it's highly significant that they're both stationing at the same time. And this is really intensifying the messages that we're getting at the beginning of this Mercury retrograde period. But remember, this is a liminal process, and we can use this to change and transform. Now, I also said this means that the Mercury retrograde period is ending around the same time that Saturn is stationing direct. So it begins with Mercury stationing retrograde and Jupiter stationing retrograde. It ends with Saturn stationing direct and Mercury stationing direct. And so at the end of it, in addition to Mercury giving us a very loud message about how we've changed across this retrograde period, we will be getting massive messages from Saturn, who will be stationing direct in Pisces for the final time before moving on to Aries for good. This is going to bring a sobering, waking up quality at the same time that Mercury is also waking up, and we will have a hyper focused ability to really attune ourselves to what's going on in our reality. But keep in mind that Mercury and Saturn together, that combination, and then them stationing, and they are going to be stationing in a trine to one another in a harmonious relationship. They are really powerful in creating worlds, changing our worlds, bringing things into manifestation in the material realm, and really making changes. So we're going to have a powerful opportunity to make the changes that need to be made when we get to the end of November. The other thing about this Mercury retrograde period, as I mentioned, is that it begins in Sagittarius, which is a fire sign, and it ends in Scorpio, which is a water sign. Fire signs in the dominant astrological paradigm are considered to be hot and dry. They move, they inspire. That heat sets things into motion. They are externally directed. They also reach to the heights of the heavens above. They bring in spiritual illumination, enthusiasm, inspiration, inspiriting the spirit, and moving fast, getting big visionary ideas, really wanting to ignite things, ignite change. Whereas water signs are typically considered cold and moist, cold and wet. So, being cold, water signs are considered much more internal, more cautious, taking things within. So, on one hand, we have this externally directed quality of the fire signs in opposition to the internally directed quality of the water signs. But water signs, of course, being wet and moist means they can synthesize, they can blend, they can dissolve things, they can take in all these different influences and blend them together and synthesize something out of that. That is also in opposition to that dry quality of the fire signs, which can really clarify things, separate things, discriminate things. This can be helpful when you really want to hit a target. But because we have the Mercury retrograde beginning in this fire sign, it's going to be more about clarifying and separating out and using that heat to separate out what needs to change, what needs to be released, and then going into this water sign for this deep journey within and allowing things to blend and go into that solutio phase and things dissolve and all the things breaking down, going through this dissolution and letting them recohere, letting something coagulate out of that dissolution. And so this is one of the things that's so powerful about this Mercury retrograde is moving between a fire sign and a water sign that have no common ground. It makes it challenging, but it also increases the potential for transformation. And of course, these are not just any fire sign and water sign. Sagittarius is the fiery home of Jupiter, whereas Scorpio is the watery home of Mars. And so Sagittarius being that fiery home of Jupiter gives it that more visionary quality of really leaping to big visions and ideas. And so that could be something that's really coming up at the outset are larger ideas and larger visions of where we want things to go, but realizing what's not in alignment right now with where we do want to go and how can we make changes to get there. Whereas Scorpio, being this home of Mars, is really going to enhance that ability for deep penetrative insight, as well as real boldness and courage to take action and embody the changes on the other side of this liminal period. We can also think about how Sagittarius is a fluid, mutable sign of transition. So different things coming up at once, or might be a whole bunch of things going on at once that is making us a little bit scattered and having to multitask at the beginning when Mercury is stationing in Sagittarius. But going back to Scorpio, a fixed sign, this is a sign that is going to help us take in the changes for long-term growth and development, and we can make changes that will have a long-term impact. And so the period of Mercury being retrograde in Sagittarius will last from November 9th until November 18th. And this will be the period of real intensive breakdowns and purging. And so the Sagittarius part of your natal chart will really be undergoing this deep breakdown and renovation here. But remember, this is going to be part of really powerful changes that can happen. Then Mercury will move back into Scorpio. Mercury will be retrograde in Scorpio from November 18th until November 29th, when Mercury stations direct. And so then we're going to have this deep internal transformative process going on with Mercury retrograde during that time period. After Mercury stations direct in Scorpio at the end of November, Mercury will start moving forward again in Scorpio and then eventually reach Sagittarius on December 11th. And so this will be the ability in the Scorpio parts of our chart to now be embodying and integrating these changes and getting things moving in forward motion. And that also means that once Mercury comes back to Sagittarius on December 11th, there can be the ability to bring repairs and renovations and make those important changes that we realized we needed to make with those Sagittarius topics, however that works out in our chart, depending on what house it is, or if we have planets there or aspects there, whatever it is, we're going to be able to make those changes and move forward with that directionality of the new vision in Sagittarius once Mercury comes back there. And that will take us through the end of 2025. And so there's also an interesting thing that the new year will begin with Mercury leaving Sagittarius and going into Capricorn. And so there is a very interesting, even closing down the calendar year of 2025, that we can think about this Mercury retrograde facilitating and getting us ready for those new year intentions that we're going to be setting for the new year of 2026. This is a chart for Mercury stationing retrograde on November 9th. And you can see on this chart that Mars in Sagittarius is about 3 degrees away from Mercury, heading towards Mercury. And that is why there's going to be such a strong quality of Mars with Mercury, which can increase some of those difficulties and discord and disruptions. Yet keep in mind that this is pointing you to what needs to be changing and what can change over the course of this Mercury retrograde period. Mercury is, of course, with Mars in the sign of Jupiter, and we have Jupiter in Cancer. Now, looking at this, it may not look like Mercury in Sagittarius is making any major aspect with Jupiter in Cancer, but they do in fact have a very special connection. Mercury and Jupiter are in what's called contra-antiscia. This involves in part the fact that Sagittarius and Cancer are signs of equal ascension. They rise at the same speed over the horizon in diurnal motion. And it also means that contra-antiscia, when it is exact by degree, which this one is pretty close to, the midpoint of these two placements are at 0 degrees of Aries and Libra. And so because the equinoxes, these days of equal light and darkness, are at the midpoint of where they are, it's sort of like there's this opposing quality of as much light as there is where Jupiter would be in Cancer, there is that much darkness in Sagittarius where Mercury is. Also, the same thing I mentioned earlier with fire and water signs, there's no common ground between them. Fire signs are hot and dry, water signs are cold and moist. They are making this very powerful connection, even though they have these very dissimilar qualities. For some of you, the contra-antiscia might be too much information to take in. All you need to really know is that Mercury and Jupiter have this incredible, powerful connection right now as they are stationing, in which they are having their forces combine in this very catalytic way that's going to make these messages of Mercury and Jupiter even more pronounced. And this is, again, especially powerful because they rule opposite signs. And so there's going to be these house topics in your chart that are activated. It could be about your inner life and your outer life, yourself and your relationships, your creativity and your audience, all sorts of different polarities of topics and combinations that could be activated right now. And so it makes the potential for big information about what needs to be changed incredibly pronounced. Even more so because, of course, Jupiter is stationing retrograde. And when Jupiter is stationing retrograde on November 11th, Jupiter is doing this as part of a grand water trine with the Sun in Scorpio and Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Grand water trines have this incredible flow of energy between them. One of the things about this that's particularly important to me is the fact that Saturn and Neptune ending their cycle right now are part of this grand water trine with the sun's illumination coming into it as Jupiter is stationing. And so this is going to help give us big insights and messages into how that dissolution of Saturn and Neptune, the uncertainty we might be feeling about the world and our personal lives that go with the Saturn Neptune combination. But keep in mind the Saturn Neptune connection also holds the capacity for redreaming our life. And it also holds within it incredible potential to bring about change. And so we're getting messages right now about this in really powerful ways with both Jupiter and Mercury stationing simultaneously. So keep in mind that if you don't like what's going on right now and you're realizing things that you want to change, really Mercury retrograde is perfect to bring this about, especially this one, as we're going to look at. And so it's also important to keep in mind that Mercury is part of this grand water trine that I just was talking about and will end up being part of it when Mercury is stationing direct. Mercury was already part of this grand water trine at the end of October. So that final week of October, from around October 22nd to October 29th, that was when Mercury was direct in Scorpio, really engaging close trine aspects with Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune while moving direct. Then, of course, Mercury went into Sagittarius, where we're going through this retrograde phase now and this breakdown. And then Mercury will come back into Scorpio on November 18th for this great period of purification in this water trine. So this water trine that we're already maybe getting some messages about right now with Jupiter stationing, Mercury is going to take us really deep into it from November 18th to 29th. And as Mercury stations direct, we will come out of this with much greater clarity for how to move forward. And then as Mercury moves back through Scorpio from November 29th through December 11th, Mercury will be engaging this grand water trine, and we have the potential for incredible transformation, change, and forward motion and clarity with that forward motion to emerge out of this. But as I mentioned, the beginning of this Mercury retrograde with Mercury combining with Mars is the part that could feel the most disruptive, the most piercing with insight too. You might get some really sharp, critical even analysis. Remember, just use that in ways that can be constructive. Mercury will combine with Mars exactly on November 12th. So November 12th will be the most intensified expression of this Mercury-Mars combination. This will go with great strife and arguments and contention in the world and great debates unfolding. In the United States, we've had the government shutdown. Right now, there's a deal possibly working out. But as we approached this, we were getting all these flights canceled here airline flights canceled related to this. And so we're seeing there the Mars discord and disruption really coming in. That's just one example of it. And in your personal lives, keep in mind that the propensity for verbal conflict and using really sharp words is going to be increased. So bring a lot of mindfulness to that in your communication, and instead use that incisive ability of Mars for sharp analysis and really problem solving what needs to change and where you need to act, and really gather the courage that's available with Mars here for Mercury to take that courage of Mars into the underworld, into this descent into the underworld and this inner journey that we're going to go through of breakdown that's going to lead to a reconstitution, a coagulation, a recoherence of our purpose on the other side. The other big influence, though, is Pluto. So after Mercury separates from that conjunction with Mars on November 12th, Mercury will slowly start moving towards a sextile with Pluto in Aquarius that will become exact on November 17th. And as Mercury moves from that conjunction with Mars on November 12th to the sextile with Pluto on November 17th, Mercury will also fittingly be descending into the underworld, taking on that psychopomp role. But the sextile aspect with Pluto is actually harmonious. There's all sorts of new life for us to discover in the underworld that Pluto is going to be guiding us towards. And so I really love this sextile as part of the deep change and transformation that we can bring about. And so we'll be getting a lot of messages in this week leading up to November 17th about what does need to change. Sometimes with Pluto, we want to resist the new desires, but we need to figure out how can we start working these into our life and using that psychopomp quality of Mercury in the underworld to do that inner work on ourselves. There also might be things related to this Mercury-Pluto aspect that go back to the end of October, when Mercury first formed a sextile aspect with Pluto on October 30th. So that was when Mercury was direct, had the sextile on October 30th. Now, on November 17th, Mercury will be moving retrograde back into a sextile with Pluto. After Mercury stations direct at the end of November and comes forward again on December 13th, there'll be another one. So there may be a story arc across this. One thing about Mercury-Pluto, though, is that this really is an aspect that can be about speaking truth to power and really reclaiming your voice. And that is going to be something that's part of this. And hopefully you can then work with it in empowering ways. Then what will happen is Mercury will move from that sextile with Pluto and then move back into Scorpio on November 18th. That means that as soon as Mercury is coming back into Scorpio, Mercury is going to be forming an opposition with Uranus, who is now at the end of Taurus. The exact opposition between Mercury retrograde in Scorpio with Uranus and Taurus will take place on November 19th during the dark of the moon. This is extremely powerful. And so whereas Pluto will take us into our depths, connect us to these new desires and empowering directions that can emerge out of this underworld process. Uranus is going to come in more like a lightning strike, like a shattering, like a major wake-up call that, again, can be connecting us to where are we out of alignment? How can we connect more to that authentic purpose and what we're really here to do? It may also make us more prone for rebellion and some very bold action. But it's also happening at the very end of this lunar cycle, with the moon forming a conjunction with Venus, as the moon then is also heading towards an opposition with Uranus that will be coming in with the new moon in Scorpio the next day. So this is incredibly powerful because Mercury is in the absolute depths of the underworld. The moon is also moving into the underworld, And Venus, she is also moving under the beams of the sun within 15 degrees of the sun. So she's also in her own process of moving into the underworld. And yet at the same time, we're getting these Promethean flashes of insight and magical liberation and emancipation from the bonds of where we have been. This is a really powerful time to release the past, to connect in with your ancestors, to really take on those gifts that your ancestors want to give you, to break past patterns and really embrace this new purpose that could be coming up. But again, it's going to be very interior. We're still very much in this dissolution here. And so the Uranian insights are likely to be much more in this type of revelatory way. Now, there was a previous opposition between Mercury in Sagittarius and Uranus in Gemini on October 29th. Once Mercury stations direct and comes forward again, there will be another opposition between Mercury and Uranus on December 10th. And again, that December 10th one that's coming up is likely to be the one where we're able to get more catalytic, forward, clear momentum with whatever Uranus is waking us up to. But that is not all, because Mercury retrograde will also be forming an exact aspect with the other outer planet, Neptune. Neptune at the end of Pisces for the final time in our lifetime. That same day that Mercury is forming the opposition with Uranus, Mercury will then move into an exact flowing trine with Neptune. This is Mercury coming back into that grand water trine. There is also a previous trine between Mercury and Neptune on October 29th. Once Mercury is direct again, Mercury will come back into another trine with Neptune on December 11th. So you're picking up here, I hope, how Mercury is contacting all of these outer planets, all of the big storylines of collective and personal change that's going on. And on the other side, once Mercury's moving direct again, Mercury's going to come back into aspects with these. And so we're really getting a chance to realign with the much larger changes, and it really wants to emerge out of our depths. And of course, with Neptune, this could bring up disillusionment with the way things have been. But I think really here, we're really at the absolute depths of Mercury, right before Mercury is being reanimated. And I think this can be especially powerful for imagination and intuition, and really trusting your own inner intuition. Trusting your own intuition and your own inner knowing is going to be really key here. And it's likely that there can be all sorts of synchronicities and dreams and other various messages coming from non-ordinary realms of Neptune that emerge here, that are accessible here, and can help give us some guidance. Then what happens on November 20th, the next day, is this incredibly powerful Scorpio new moon that is occurring at the same time Mercury is entering the heart of the sun. It's incredibly powerful because on one hand, we have a new lunar cycle happening at the same time Mercury is ending and beginning a cycle, right? Mercury's going to have this whole new morning star phase emerging on the other side of this, as I already mentioned. And yet this is also a new moon with Mercury that is forming an opposition with Uranus. So there's all sorts of huge revelatory insights and liberating impulses emerging with this. And yet it's also a new moon in Mercury that's forming a very close trine with Neptune, in range of a trine with both Jupiter and Saturn. So we're reactivating this grand water trine in extremely powerful ways. And we also now have Venus starting to get into the picture and coming closer into connection with this grand water trine. So this is just an incredibly powerful new moon for a reset, a regeneration, and deep, deep internal changes that can really lead to some long-term growth forward. It's not a new moon where you can really expect to have everything together, but it's an incredibly powerful new moon just for that insight and getting more clear about the changes that you're really wanting to put into effect, and getting ready for this really powerful new year of 2026 that's on the horizon, that's going to really be bringing in even more massive changes. And this new moon is so connected to everything that I think it will end up being incredibly helpful for the reorientation that is needed with your life. We then will move from that new moon into the exact conjunction between Mercury and the Sun. And you can see here that when that happens just a little bit later, the moon is only 1 degree away from the Sun. And so this is all going to be occurring. The new moon will be taking place on November 20th at 1:47 in the morning in Eastern time zone. And then the exact conjunction between Mercury and the Sun will take place at 4:23 a.m. So it's really, less than 3 hours in between, 2.5 hours or so just in between them. It's all essentially happening at once, and it just makes this incredibly powerful. This is when Mercury is in that sacred heart of the Sun, being reanimated. Really pay attention to the new ideas that you really want to be developing and the new creative directions that are really wanting to emerge out of this. I think it's going to just be incredibly powerful for getting in touch with that and what needs to change with your life. And with this water trine, I really like the potential being here to really be able to come into a formulation of how to make that happen. We're getting obviously an incredible Uranian activation, a revelation at the same time. And so after that new moon on November 20th, Mercury will start moving away from the Sun towards Venus. And now we will have Venus coming together with Mercury retrograde. Venus coming into the picture in Scorpio, as Venus is also going into the underworld, disappearing from view, is really deeply going to take us into our depths of desire and getting in touch with what is our true desire, what needs to be let go of our old desires, and how can we start reharmonizing, bringing things together to be in alignment with how to bring about and go forward on these new desires that are emerging. In contrast to Mercury and Mars, which can go with verbal conflict and discord, Venus and Mercury brings the potential for greater eloquence, for being able to communicate what we need and what we want. It could be very powerful also creatively for writing, research, music, doing something very creative, especially any kind of creative project you're engaging over the course of this Mercury retrograde. There could be really powerful insights and artistic revelations and innovations that start really coming together once we move through that Scorpio new moon and once Venus and Mercury form their conjunction. Mercury and Venus will form their conjunction exactly on November 24th. You can see this will be taking place at 22 degrees and 45 minutes of Scorpio, and it will also then be part of this grand water trine between Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune. So again, this is just incredibly powerful for this realignment and reorientation. At this point, Mercury isn't becoming visible, but Mercury is at least also out of being combust the Sun, like so close to burning up with the Sun. So Mercury's starting to emerge out of that period of purging and purification. And so coming out of that intense period of purging and immediately combining with Venus is going to really help with Venus and Mercury here, bringing us some deeper understanding about the changes that are going on. This could relate to relationships of all sorts in our life. Basically, all of our relational patterns will also be activated by this, in addition to artistic, creative processes. Then what will happen as Venus and Mercury begin to separate, Saturn will be stationing direct, and the exact stationing direct of Saturn will take place on November 27th, with Saturn at basically 25 degrees of Pisces. This is the final stationing of Saturn in Pisces. Remember, Saturn first went into Pisces in March of 2023. Whatever has been going on with Saturn and Pisces since then is really coming to a climax here. We're getting the final lessons, the final messages about the meaning of Saturn in our charts in Pisces here. And Neptune is only like 4 degrees away in Pisces. And so this ending of the Saturn Neptune cycle in Pisces is also getting incredibly intensified here. What's also going on here is a heliacal rise of Mercury. So while Saturn is stationing direct exactly, Mercury is becoming visible as a morning star, able to be seen again before sunrise. And Hermes is re entering the world with a big message. So these messages of Mercury and Saturn erupting here are going to help us attune to the reality of our life and how can we really make the tangible material changes that we really need to make. What do we really want to build with our life and our work and our ideas, and what do we really want to focus on going forward? This is going to be a very powerful moment, and it is immediately followed by Mercury stationing direct 2 days later on November 29th. Fascinatingly, you can see on this chart at the same time Mercury is stationing direct, the moon is forming a conjunction with Saturn and heading into a conjunction with Neptune. So we're getting this grand water trine really activated. And those messages of Saturn stationing direct combined with the messages of Mercury stationing direct are incredibly intense, with the moon bringing us into this. So again, really pay attention to what's going on here. And this is the time to start acting on and beginning that process of integrating and embodying and moving forward with those deep internal changes that have been going on over the course of the Mercury retrograde period. You can't expect bringing these changes into your life to make everything easy. It's going to be a little volatile, but as Mercury starts picking up speed, moving forward again, there's going to be greater ease and opportunities to embody and integrate those changes into your life. We then get the aspect of Mercury coming back forward into this exact grand water trine again. This will happen on December 6th, when Mercury is starting to move forward and now comes back into the exact trine with Jupiter. This happens at the same time Mercury is reaching maximum elongation as a morning star on December 7th. So as Mercury re-engages this grand water trine, Mercury is also now finally starting to pick up more speed. And this really puts us into this phase of integrating these deep changes with this watery flow of this grand water trine available to creatively assist us. So this is another really powerful moment. Then what happens just as Mercury is hitting that max elongation, starting to move faster and heading into the final trine with Neptune, Mercury's still engaging the grand water trine here. We have Neptune stationing direct on December 10th. At the same time, Mercury is coming into an exact trine with Neptune on December 11th. So the stationing of Neptune, which is the final time in our lifetimes that Neptune will station in Pisces. This is incredibly powerful. Neptune's been in Pisces since 2011, 2012, except for a little spell earlier this year from the end of March until October. And again, Mercury is completely picking up the messages of both Saturn and Neptune stationing direct. So we honestly, to me, we can't ask for more than this in terms of being able to help us reorient to the way things are so dramatically changing with this Saturn Neptune combination. Keep in mind with Saturn Neptune, it can have a propensity of despair because of the incredible uncertainty. So another thing about this grand water trine and coming to the end of this and Mercury moving direct, it's going to be a really good idea to gather with people, gather with community, create experiences of joy and pleasure and creativity, do things to increase hope and inspiration rather than falling into too much solitude and hopelessness. Look around for the support that can be found and really organize opportunities for creativity and joy and community and so forth as we come out of this. What's also powerful is not only is Mercury coming into that trine with stationing Neptune, Mercury is also forming that opposition with Uranus again. And so there's all sorts of really powerful inspiration available here with Neptune stationing direct. Dreams and that sort of otherworldly dimension will also be accessible. That could also come through music, art, anything that can get you in touch with that other worldly realm, going out into nature, doing whatever you can to get out of the usual routine and open up into some other realms of insight. Combined with Uranus opposing Mercury, it's incredibly powerful. And so these are some of the reasons why this Mercury retrograde period has so much transformative potential. I really hope that all of you are able to reach deeply within yourself to bring about that transformation that can be available. If you'd like to talk about this astrology as well as the astrology of 2026, my books are open for astrology consultations for November and December. I will put a link to my scheduler below so you can book a consultation with me. I'll also put a link to my Patreon community. I have an active Patreon community with 3 different tiers. The 2 higher tiers both involve monthly gatherings, meetings, and classes, whereas the lower tier gives you access to some discounts as well as extra material. Primarily, the extra material on that tier has been in the form of weekly videos I release on my Patreon that I do not release on YouTube, that goes through the astrology of each week and what the moon is doing. So please check that out. Also, if you have not already liked and subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do. I'm starting to get close to 3,000 subscribers, and I want to go past that soon and go far beyond that number. But I'm hoping to get there soon. So please like and subscribe, share it with other people you know who would be interested. Well, I hope you all find some words of wisdom within this video, that the presence of Hermes will be with you to guide you through this liminal period. I'll be back in touch with all of you soon.